Hello, my name's Michaela, and this is a book that I wrote when I was 16 years old. This is part 2, so go back and watch part 1, which I cover off the prologue before I start the first chapter. This is chapter 1, and I'm on a mission to figure out if this book that I wrote when I was 16, Ascension, was cringe or creative. So please enjoy. This is chapter 1. I also want to say quickly, I'm sorry for the delay in the first chapter of this series. I was sick and really busy, and I was also waiting for this new microphone to come, so I wanted to make sure it was captured in good sound. So yeah, sorry that it's been a little bit delayed, but here is chapter 1. Chapter 1, Home. I trudged down the aisle and towards my seat, my shoes scuffing the floor of the bus. I was trying to glance out the window again, but it was so hard to resist. As I sat down on an itchy seat, I felt something slide down my cheek and drip off my chin. I looked down as a tear slid down the lapel of my shirt. Catching one of the tears on my finger, I stared at it for a while. I started to think about the last time I had cried. It wasn't too long ago, in fact. No, now was not the time for that. I quickly wiped the tear away from my face and shoved my hand into my bag. My fingers searched for a cold square shape that was my iPod. Once I found it, I tucked the earphones into my ears and tried to drown out my thoughts with music. But all I could do was picture his face as the bus pulled away. "Behave yourself, Mer," he told me, pulling me into one of his big bear hugs. That's what I will remember most about that moment. The look in his eyes, it told me he loved me even without saying so. The look was fleeting, barely lasting a moment, before he picked up my suitcase and put it into the under luggage compartment of the bus. Even so, just by that look, I knew he'd always be there for me, my big brother. I wasn't just saying goodbye to Luke that day. I was saying goodbye to all the memories, my old home, my old life. That's how I'll always remember leaving Maytown. Wow, that's surprising, I thought. This feeling of nostalgia was not something I expected. I was actually going to miss my old repetitive life. I mean, I guess it's normal for every person to miss the place that they had lived their whole life, but I always thought that I wouldn't. Maytown had never been special to me. I was glad to get out of a town in the middle of nowhere, filled with people going nowhere. The only thing about it I would miss was the memories and the people that filled them. But all that was left there now was my brother. I never made very many good friends, and he was now my only family. My mother was an only child, and her parents shunned her when she married my dad. Of course, my family history wasn't one to brag about. My dad left us when I was barely even born and never looked back. He never talked about his own parents, so I grew up without many grandparents at all. After he was gone, all we had was my mum, Caitlin. That is until a few years ago when she collapsed at work and was diagnosed with an illness and there was no cure for. That is until a few years ago when she collapsed at work and was diagnosed with an illness that there was no cure for. She had always been a very hopeful person, and as her daughter, I was very much like her. I had never doubted she would live, but I soon learnt that hope couldn't save a person, as I could not save my mother. Ever since then, it's just been me and Luke, my 19-year-old brother. He was barely old enough to look after me when she died, but it meant he couldn't go to university until I left home. So I decided it was time for me to move in with my godparents and let him create his own life. I couldn't move out on my own yet because I was only 17, just 1 year off. And so I was about to live with my godparents I'd only met once, who had offered to take me in. Luke didn't like the idea very much at first, but when I told him what I wanted, he couldn't say no. I wasn't lying to him. I wanted him to be happy, and making him happy meant leaving Maytown and going to live with some strangers in Bloomsbury. I thought about him as I felt the bumps in the road and the countryside rolling past. The music, soft in my ears, told me that everything was going to be all right, and for a moment I let my mind fly away. And that moment must have seemed shorter than it was, because not long after I awoke with a jolt. The bus had lurched forward, and my ears now woke up with the rest of me, knowing my brain trying to remember where I was. I expected to feel the familiar comfort of my own bed back home, but instead I felt the scratchy surface of my seat. With a pang, I realized I would never sleep in my own bed again. I twisted and turned until my body was more comfortable, lying across the two seats with my head on my bag. That was not an easy task. I longed to be asleep again, but I knew sleep wouldn't come. The slow drum of the stalled engine vibrated under me, and I heard a pair of footsteps walking down the aisle towards me. "I think this is your stop, love," a voice said behind me. I sat up and forced my eyes open, brushing the hair out of my face. Squinting up into the blinding light, I could see a short, squat woman standing over me. She was wearing an old navy blue polo shirt and a pair of scruffy track pants. Her messy ginger hair had come away from the bun, and she had so neatly placed it in that morning. Her face showed a worried wrinkle across her forehead, which then smoothed as I sat up, the corners of her mouth pulling up into a sweet smile. "You all right, love?" she said, helping me to stand out of my seat. "I think this is your stop. You're stopping at Bloomsbury, am I right?" I nodded quickly, shooting a glance out of the window as if I expected to see the main road of Maytown. She said something else to me, but I wasn't listening. I longed to get out of this stuffy enclosed space, striding down the aisle towards the open air and the bus door. Stepping onto the pavement, the first thing I saw was trees lining down the sidewalk. They stood in front of the string of brown and green fences outside every house. I lifted up a hand to shield the sun from my eyes and smiled at the brilliant blue sky passing over me. It was rare to see a sunny October morning. "Here you go," the bus driver said from behind me. I heard her drop my suitcase at my feet. I turned just in time to see her close the bus door and pull out from the curb. I waved pathetically after it as it drove away, as if I was waving to someone I knew. God, I was tired. I was still staring at the same stretch of road, and the bus had disappeared on, when a voice behind me called my name. "Mirabelle!" Her voice was familiar to me, and I knew why. Back home in my mother's old collection of home videos, there was one I remembered watching over and over again. This was because it was the only one with my mother in it, my parents' wedding video. I used to watch videos non-stop after my mum died. It was my sort of way of grieving. It helped to hear her voice and to see her face again. The woman who called my name sounded familiar because it was hers. It was constantly heard from behind the camera as she filmed the wedding. Jane was my mother's best friend, and once upon a time, her maid of honor. I turned to see the face that matched that voice. The first thing I noticed about Jane was that she had shoulder-length caramel blonde hair. She was quite short for her age, but wouldn't have easily noticed from the clothes that she wore, particularly the lengthy heels she now walked towards me wearing. I could hear them tap-tap as she walked closer. As she came closer, I saw her face was round, with a perfect complexion and sky-blue eyes. She had a small buttoned-up white shirt and high-waisted black pants. Behind her, a small green car was parked. I gazed at the reflection of clear blue sky in the windshield. "Hey, Mirabelle," she repeated, moving her head to meet my dreamy gaze. "I guess that's me," I muttered, shaking my head conscious. "I'm your Aunt Jane," she said with a brilliant, sincere smile. "But don't call me that because it makes me sound old. Just call me Jane." I nodded, not really in the mood to talk, and after a moment of giving me the once-over, she understood the reason for my silence. "Let's get you home, okay?" she said with a wink. Making my stubborn legs move towards the car and sit in front seemed like a harder task than usual. My whole body was stiff from sleeping on the bus. "What time did you get up to catch your bus this morning?" she asked. once I had opened the door to get in. "Oh, I'm not sure, maybe about 5 a.m., I said, stifling back a yawn that proved it. I sat in the passenger seat as she prepared as she blah, blah, blah. I sat in the passenger seat as she popped the trunk and hauled my suitcase into her boot. The floral scent that wafted through Jane's car was pleasant and reassuring. I watched with much enjoyment as she hopped into the driver's seat next to me and turned the ignition. She seemed to bounce as she moved, her whole body as bubbly as the personality my mother had described her. A loud blast of music echoed through her radio as soon as she started. She made a face, banging her head against the music and making me laugh. Jane was my mother's best friend, and although I had never met her before, she was my godmother. She was there when my parents got married and when Luke and I were born. I had seen pictures of her in my family albums and heard countless stories about how much fun her and my mother had when they were in high school and college together. I always thought she was quite attractive in those pictures, but now that I saw her up close, I realized that it wasn't her outer appearance that made her beautiful, but her personality and her enthusiasm as well. With every word she said, she genuinely meant it, even if she was just talking about how great Bloomsbury was. My eyes peered out the windshield long enough to see that we had turned around down a short street lined with houses. "And this is us." The car slowed to a stop. Wondering why she hadn't opened her door yet, I turned to face her. She was watching me, her expression serious now. "I really hope you like it here, Mirabelle. I know it can't be easy for you to leave everything and live in a new place. We all just want you to be happy and grow up in a more stable environment, at least until you finish school. And I want you to know that we're happy to have you here." She seemed to really mean it for some reason. It looked like she needed me to be there. Maybe she missed my mum as much as I did. 1,000 replies swirled around in my head, like, "Actually, it's kind of a relief to be here." But I didn't have enough energy to say it and still sound grateful to both her and Luke. "Thanks" seemed like the easiest option to go with. "Oh, and before we go inside, I just want to show you something," she smiled, excitement gleaming across her face. Her smile didn't falter as she opened her door, leapt out of the car, and practically pulled me out by my arm. She locked her arm with mine so I couldn't escape, and as we walked up to it, I got a first look at my new home. It seemed like a big house for only 3 people living in it. It was 2-storied, and it had 2 defining colors, blue and white, on the outside anyway. There were even blue and white flowers hung around the vines that crept up the cream-paneled walls. I saw there was a wooden archway to my right as we walked up the grey stone path. I could just see where another gravel path between it led into the lush green of the backyard. She led me past the grand wooden front door and towards their 2-car garage. I twisted my head back around so that my eyes gazed over to the exterior of the house one more time, only to notice the blue shutters around each window, white drapes hanging behind them. Jane unlocked the garage door and swung it open. For a moment, as I turned to see what she was leading me to, I wondered why she didn't park in the garage. But I didn't need to ask, because as soon as I wondered, the answer was right there in front of me. My look moved quickly toward Jane with disbelief, wondering whether she was showing it to me because it was mine, or because she was just showing it off. Surely it couldn't be mine. She barely knew me. Her smile broadened even wider, laughing at my bewildered expression. "I heard you have a motorcycle license," she teased. "And I suppose you wouldn't want your own and I suppose you would want your own means of transport once you got here, so but but it's a I stuttered. "A Vespa," I whispered quietly, as if I was afraid that if I said it out loud it would disappear. "It's a Vespa S, actually. Apparently they're all the rage in the moment," she said. She said this so casually that I thought she might have been joking. "Oh my God," I squealed, and with a giant burst of energy I leaped forwards, embracing her into a tight hug. Realizing my impoliteness, I pushed her backwards by the shoulders so I read her expression. "You know you really didn't have to. It's too much. I can't accept it." Oh, shush. I know, I didn't have to. I was a teenager once too. I'm just giving you what me and your mother never had. She was still smiling at me warmly, but the smile was a different kind. Her eyes seemed to crinkle just in the right places and catch just the right light in order to reveal the mother in her. Well, thank you so much, I said, hugging her again, giggling like an excited toddler with a new toy. Stop hugging me and go try it for size. But before she had the chance to finish her sentence, I was already bounding over to my new scooter. Staring at it, I could now admire it, knowing it was my own. It had a shiny cream coat of paint, framed in silver and black. The seat looked so soft, and the tires must have been about 5 minutes old. Slowly I straddled it, resting my hands on each of the handlebars. So you like it then? I heard her ask me, seemingly amused. Like it? I asked, looking up at her in disbelief. I love it. Thank you so much. Well, you're very welcome. All I ask in return is a little babysitting duty, she said, reminding me of the most recent addition to her family. Jane and her partner Eli had a small daughter called Millie, who I had only seen in emailed pictures when she was born. I was just about to ask after her when I heard footsteps coming from the garage side door. We both turned out our heads to see the newcomer, who I assumed was Eli, although from where I was standing it looked like a large box with legs walking towards us. Eli dropped the box atop others that were stacked alongside the garage wall. This action released a large clump of dust, which then clouding his face, in turn making him cough like a pack-a-day smoker. Once he had recovered, he beamed from ear to ear, first at Jane, then at me. Like my aunt, I had not met my Uncle Eli either. He looked exactly like he did in my parents' old wedding video, taken not 18 years earlier. There was stubble on his chin and cheeks, and he now had grey hairs on either side of his head, waving into his chocolate brown hair. The dimples that dented his cheeks were now made obvious due to the jubilant expression he now wore. By the look of the old grass-stained jeans and black Van Halen t-shirt he wore, you would think he was a university student or something. But Eli was now in his 40s, his wife and him looking incredibly young for their age. I heard squealing, and I guess that maybe you gave Mirabelle her welcoming present? His voice was deep and husky and drenched with a country accent. I knew it was only recognizable for those who were used to it, and could therefore tell the faint differences between both country and city accents. Eli Claremont, much like my father, was born and raised in a small country town by the harbour. They were both tough men by the time they had met Jane and my mother in their 20s, but as I heard most people say, you can take the country out of the boy, and so my godbrother had never really adapted to the modern world, and had kept most his old habits, including that of his accent, and now as I saw, his dress sense. Yes, thanks so much. It's an amazing gift, I said, now sitting sideways on my scooter and looking between Eli and Jane as they exchanged glances. I realized at that moment that maybe I was not what they were expecting. I had always hoped that Jane would think I was going to act like my mother had when she was a teenager, but apparently I had assumed wrong. So do you want to come meet her? Jane interjected, getting back to our original conversation and grabbing my hand before I had the chance to answer. She led me back towards her big wooden front door and stopping in front of it before turning the brass handle. We stepped into the house, not having much time to look around before Jane whipped around facing me. She looked very excited. I'll just go and wake her up from her nap. You stay right here. She gestured for me to wait before bounding soundlessly up the carpeted stairs and disappearing into the hallway on the second floor. I took my bag off and rested on the wooden floor, looking around the house. I gazed over the many family portraits that lined the walls. Jane and Eli graduating from college in separate photographs. Jane and Eli getting married. A baby picture of Millie when she was barely a day old. I recognized one of Luke and I. It was an old school photo. We must have been in primary school because we weren't wearing uniforms. Luke had braces back then, and my mop of brown hair stuck out from all directions despite being pulled into a tiny ponytail. We were standing at the end of our long driveway, ready to go to school. I remember that day. We refused to pose for pictures because Luke wanted to go hang out with his friends and I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to stay home with my mum. I must have been only 5 years old. Next to the stairs, there was a teak coffee table laden with several books. I stepped forward to read the book covers, recognizing one of my favorites. Maybe it was a lack of sleep or my intense concentration, but I did not hear Eli enter the front door behind us until he spoke. "You like that book?" he said from behind me. My cheeks blushed red as I jumped out from his sudden presence. It took me a minute for me to recover myself before I managed the answer. "Sorry, I trailed off embarrassingly, trying to avoid eye contact. "Hey, no worries, it's your house too now," he said warmly. "It is a good book, though. I'll be happy to lend it to you if you want." He was changing the subject for my sake. "I've already read it," I told him, taking a second to realize the meaning in what he had just said. "Wait, this is yours?" I said, sounding a little too surprised. He laughed and shook his head. "No, it's not. It's Jane's, but she introduced it to me," he said, picking up the book and looking at the cover. "Yeah, it's one of my favorites too." I smiled back at him politely. It seemed so easy to talk to Eli. I could already tell he was the type of person who tried to get along with people even if he didn't have to. He provided most of the conversation. You just had to agree and nod your head a lot. Jane was soon walking back down the stairs with both arms curled around a baby that had its head tucked shyly into the hollow of her neck. She was talking to her, asking her who I was, making her aware of me. Jane stopped when she reached the end of the stairs. Lily lifted her head and smiled at me. She had her father's warm hazel eyes and her mother's curly blonde hair. Two tiny teeth stuck out from the front of her pink gums, and she was wearing pink little winter pajamas. "Oh, she's so gorgeous," I crooned, looked back at Jane. "How old is she?" "Almost 18 months," she replied, running her hand through her toddler's tiny, curly locks. There was a pause before she handed Millie over to Eli and grabbed my hand again. "Come on, I'll give you the grand tour." She showed me into the kitchen and lounge and greeted by the same white and blue colored designs. In the lounge I saw the usual family room furnishings, along with an old wooden piano that looked brand new. It was so polished. Both the sofas were cream-colored and faced the silver sleek television set, which was currently on pause, for what I could only guess was a children's cartoon. The kitchen was just as elegant. The only things out of place were the stacks and stacks of coloring books lined on the window ledge or on the counter. Later on I found out that this was Jane's only vice. She loved cooking and she was addicted to cooking books, cooking programs, and famous chefs. It wasn't that she wanted to be a chef. In fact, she loved being a lawyer. It was just that she found solace in cooking like I did in painting, reading, or listening to music. Soon I had seen the whole house except my room, and without much fuss, I was led up the stairs and down the hallway on the second floor. Jane gestured towards the other rooms before mine, her and Eli's, Millie's bedroom, and the bathroom as we made our way down the hall. Soon we stood in front of the last white wooden door at the end of the hall. Jane turned the brass handle and pushed it open. She stepped back, gesturing for me to go ahead. The walls were white and empty compared to the walls in the rest of the house. Of course, that would be the first thing I would see. I always did hate white. It was never a colour in my eyes, just a lack of. The furniture was wooden and arranged neatly around the room. A large double bed with lavender sheets donned with about 1,000,000 black and white pillows, a chest of drawers beside it on one side, a bedside table that held a black lamp on the other side, and some kit-set bookshelves that sat directly in front of the chest, across the other side of the room. In front of the bed stood an empty desk and chair, which I immediately knew what would go in it. Across the room in front of me was a ceiling-to-floor window, and in front of it a built-in white window seat. I stepped towards the bed and sat down on it, bouncing slightly. In front of me was a wooden wardrobe built into the wall. I was still gazing around my room when Eli walked in. He laid my suitcase out in front of me, which made a loud thud when it hit the ground. He smiled at me and then walked out. "You're probably feeling tired and overwhelmed, so we'll let you get some rest, okay?" The motherly smile was spreading across her face again, but her eyes searched for something more. It made me curious rather than uncomfortable. Was she wondering if I was really that messed up? She knew my past, and if I were her, I would assume the worst too. Was she looking for some sign of what type of teenager I was, and if I would cause any trouble? But none of these things seemed to fit the look that she had given me, because that look was one of mere wondering, and that of fearful accusation. She turned around with Millie now in her arms. She had picked her up while passing Millie's room. Just before she shut the door behind her, I could see Millie's face bob up from behind Jane's shoulder. I might have imagined it, but I was sure that for a brief second she smiled at me. It was that kind of secret smile that children give you when they were told to keep an important secret, and were delighted to, because it was just between them and you. I turned back around to face my room, once Jane shut the door behind her. I made a mental note to head I made a mental note in my head to make the room more like me, and I would have to do something about the white. It was too white. I mean that it was a well-decorated room and everything, but the white didn't really make it feel like it was mine. I stood in front of my long-framed mirror and evaluated how tired I looked. The reflection on the other side did not look like me. This is why I avoided mirrors, so that I didn't look to see the dreaded half-dead look of a monster on the other side. I didn't hate my appearance or anything. In fact, there were parts of me I kind of loved. My eyes were the deepest blue, and they could change colour from grey, green or blue depending on where I was, and my hair was always my favourite too. It was thick and long, but eventually it looked good. I had inherited my hair from my mother along with my nose, so it wasn't like I hated how I looked. I just wasn't at my best when I was reflected, just like some people aren't the most photogenic. Come to think of it, I wasn't that either, but I didn't care that much. It was just one of those things. I didn't hate how I looked. I just didn't particularly love it either. Right now I knew my theory was correct. My wavy chocolate brown hair was in a messy ponytail, having slept in it like that. But by now my dark green blue eyes were veiny and red from sleep deprivation. One thing that now shocked me was the tired smile on my lips and my eyes. This had stayed in place from when my toddler niece Millie had smiled at me before leaving the rooms in the arms of her mother. It seemed to make my reflection look even more tired and pathetic looking, so now I snapped my eyes away from the mirror and looked down at what I was wearing. Had I put those on myself this morning? Because I didn't remember taking them out of my packed suitcase and putting them on. That's strange. My memory must be going now. It always scares me slightly, as I'm sure it does most people, when I don't remember doing things. Luke always said I'd be the first one to get Alzheimer's from the amount of things I forget. I walked over and lay back on my bed now, too tired to do too much else. I started to feel drowsy, so I closed my eyes, intending to open them soon after, but they were too comfortable to disturb. I found myself relaxing, moving onto my bed properly, curling my body into a fetal position, and as I dragged my body onto its side, resting my head on the pillow, I felt my breathing slow, my brain closed down, and my mind open. So that was chapter 1. It was a very long chapter. I apologise if this is a bit of a long video. I might do it in 2 parts if it is too long for me to upload. But I hope you enjoyed it. It kind of introduced some of the main characters, or at least the main character, Maribel. My thoughts on it, looking back, I really thought I was doing a lot more with my descriptors than I remember. I really had to focus on hair and eyes when it came to people, and I thought I was much better at describing the house, but it was a bit clunky. The writing is much more clunky than I remember, and it is hard to read at times, reading aloud. But yeah, and the beginning is, there are like some Twilight hints in there. This book is heavily inspired by Twilight. I read Twilight, I think, 6 months before I wrote this, and you'll hear it's a heavy inspiration, but hopefully people like that about it, because there's lots of people that like Twilight. I still love Twilight. But yeah, the whole self-sacrificing teenager moves to new town to help parental figure have more of a life is kind of the similarity here. I hope you liked it. I hope you're intrigued by it at least, and that you're interested in hearing chapter 2 and onwards. I will try to get chapter 2 up as soon as possible because I really want to keep the series going, and hopefully people listening to it / reading along with. If you did enjoy this chapter, or you were interested, or you had any questions about it, please drop a comment below, like this video, follow me if you want to follow the series, and yeah, tell me if the sound was good, because again, this is a new microphone and I really want the sound to be good. So yeah, was it cringe or was it creative? You decide.